Welcome, everyone, to the 2021 International Summer Seminar, TV or Not TV, a webinar organized by the Journal of Religion and Film and Vrije Universiteit, Amsterdam. My name is Miranda van Holland. I'll be your moderator today. I work at the Faculty of Religion and Theology at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. Currently, I am in my home in Utrecht, which is in the center of the Netherlands. And in Amsterdam at the Vrije Universiteit, we plan on hosting the next Religion and Film Conference, end of May, beginning of June next year, hopefully. We'll get back to that later. This webinar is called TV or Not TV, the definition and evolving boundaries of religion and film scholarship. And this afternoon, we have four excellent speakers for you. Dr. William Blizek from the University of Nebraska, Omaha. We have Dr. Amir Hussain from Loyola Marymount University with us. Ken White, screenwriter and filmmaker, University of Nebraska, Omaha, and John Lyden from the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Today's seminar is about the lines between film and television that have become increasingly blurred. I'm sure you must have noticed. And during the period in which we all were not able to go to the movie theaters, we instead watched streaming videos from the privacy of our own homes. And the line between film and television got even more blurred. I have little nieces that tell me that a movie is quite a long episode of any series. So I think a younger generation even finds the distinction more hard than I already find it. So what does it mean for the scholars of religion and film? Are there still meaningful distinctions between the types of media, or are these anachronisms of an earlier technology? It's time to find out, and we will find out with our four experts. But before we do, let me tell you that our four panelists will speak back to back, and they will be answering your questions at the end. In the meantime, you can address your questions. You can do so by going into the Zoom screen. You can see the button called a Q&A. If you press that, you can leave your question there. I will see it and I will address it later on after all four speakers are done. So don't keep it to yourself, write it down, the questions, and I will get back to it later. Okay. And I will make sure your question get entered. Let's get started. Without further ado, may I introduce to you John Lyden, the editor of the journal Religion and Film. He's professor of religious studies and the Blizek professor of religion and film at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. John has been the editor of the Journal of Religion and Film since 2011, so for 10 years now. He's the author of Film as Religion, Myths, Morals, and Rituals, and the editor of the Routledge Companion to Religion and Film, and he has many more. And most of all, right now, he's our first speaker. John, please.
Thanks very much, Miranda. I want to start off by saying a little bit about where this topic came from and the conversation that led to this. So it was around 2 years ago at the last International Religion and Film Conference that we were able to hold, which was in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And that's where I met Miranda face-to-face there. And we were talking about this topic, as well as many of the other people you see here today. And we started off by considering this increasingly blurry line between what we consider television and what we consider film. And in particular, that question in terms of the Journal of Religion and Film, which historically has focused on films rather than television shows, and to date has not published any articles which deal solely on television. And this was intentional with the founding of the journal back in 1997. And Bill Blizek will talk about that shortly as the founding editor, and he can give you that history. At that time, maybe it was easier to draw a line between those two things. To our credit, we never held that a film needed to be theatrically released to be called a film. And in that way, I think we were somewhat more liberal in our definition than, for example, the Motion Picture Association of America, which hosts the Oscars. And up till this year of the pandemic, they always required a film needed to have a theatrical release, even if then it was primarily shown through streaming media such as Netflix. And that was a rule that was championed by people like Steven Spielberg and the like. We didn't have that rule, but we did have some kind of distinction in our minds between what was television and what was film, that there was some kind of basic difference, some different assumptions involved. And that set of assumptions was already being questioned by many people prior to the pandemic, as, for example, Netflix films began to garner a lot of Oscar nominations, and the quality and diversity of types of television fare has improved over the decades since the journal was founded. And also, as short-form streaming online programs have been developed on channels like Netflix, you have a show with, for example, 8 episodes that tells a continuous story with a clear beginning and an ending. I should also note that under the category of television, I'm including not just broadcast television, which people sometimes mean, but also streaming video, as this is becoming the more normal distribution model for episodic shows. So to put the question in that way, is a season of Stranger Things, for example, more than just a long movie? Does it matter where one views the product? As people now especially have been watching films, perhaps meant for theatrical release through streaming technology, on their computers, on their phones. If the experience of seeing a film in a theater is not essential to call something a film, then what is essential? How many episodes or how long can something be before it turns from a film into a program or a series? Not to mention the fact that production values are now quite similar for different media. They're all created digitally, as opposed to the days when films were shot and shown on actual celluloid film, and TV shows were often televised live or perhaps shown from videotape, and they were also often viewed as inferior from an artistic standpoint. I raise all these questions now, especially as the editor of the Journal of Religion and Film, as I think we need to consider whether we should be able to publish articles on streaming content that includes episodic shows. Is there any reason to exclude those? Can those be considered films? And does it even matter how we classify these things? These are the questions I put to my co-panelists, each of whom has a distinct perspective to share and presumably their own questions to raise about it.
Thank you so much for that, John. We'll get back to you later. Time to introduce the next speaker to all of you, which is, and of course his name was already mentioned, none less than Bill Blizek. He's Professor Emeritus of the Philosophy and Religion at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and he is the founding father of the Journal of Religion and Film. We're going to watch a pre-recording of Bill, but Bill is actually with us today, so just so you know. All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Blizek, co-founder of the Journal of Religion and Film, which is published by the University of Nebraska at Omaha. I'm delighted all of you could be here and join us for this special summer seminar on the topic of TV or not TV. When Ron Burke and I first published the first issue of the Journal of Religion and Film, we then received a number of essays by people writing about what seemed to us to be more television programming than film. And we knew early on that we were going to have to make a decision about whether to include such material in the journal or not. And we voted not TV. There were two basic reasons why we did not want to be working with television programs. The first is that we love movies. We loved watching them together. We loved talking about them and enjoying them together, and that was an interesting part of our lives. What did he see that I didn't? What did I see that he didn't? We were fans of film, if you will. In fact, the impetus for starting the Journal of Religion and Film was an essay by Andrew Greeley, the priest and sociologist and novelist, entitled "The Faces of God in the Movies." And it was that set of movies that led us to think about putting together the Journal of Religion and Film. Honestly, we didn't have a lot of interest in the other media, and if we were going to include other media, we were going to have to do a lot of work to understand other media, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted to focus our time on film. The second reason that we didn't want to include other media in our journal is that in 1997 there were enough movies produced and released that it would take 20 years before people would write about all of the movies that were related in one way or another to religion. Over that 20-year period, you would have another batch of movies that would in fact keep us going and probably keep us going forever. As an indicator of the number of movies that were available, we reviewed for the journal more than 50 movies from just 2 film festivals, the 2021 Sundance Film Festival and the 2021 Slamdance Film Festival. So it was clear that there would be lots of material. And then, in addition to that, early in the publishing of the journal, we didn't have many foreign films, and then we began to get essays on films from around the world. So in this sense, there was going to be a never-ending supply of material. So given that there were so many films available to us, there were so many more films going to be available to us, and not only American films, but films from around the world, why would we want to work hard at learning something about media that didn't interest us and would expand our coverage when we weren't going to cover all the movies that were produced anyhow. Before I turn this over to my colleagues, let me say a word or two about how I now understand television in relationship to religion and film. At our International Conference on Religion and Film in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Amir Hussain talked about his conversations with filmmakers. And filmmakers are asking for more flexibility in the way in which they tell their stories. And I was impressed by that idea that we ought to be listening to filmmakers. And I was reminded of a student of mine who wanted to write a story for his final paper in a class I taught on human values in medicine. And I told him that would be fine. But very quickly we realized that my syllabus said that final papers had to be limited to 10 pages, double spaced. And so Robert said, I can't write my story in that short space. And I said, that's okay. There's a sense in which stories write themselves. So you write your story, and whatever length it is, that will be the story you wanted to tell. And this seems to me to be an important way of understanding the stories that we see on film and can see on television. As an example, I take Martin Scorsese's The Irishman. I told a friend I was going to watch The Irishman, and they said, oh, that's over 3 hours in length. That's terrible. I said, well, I'll give it a shot. So I watched it. And it never seemed to be a very long film to me. It was engrossing, engaging. I was caught up in it, and the time flew by. And after I'd seen it and was thinking about its length, I realized that if you had cut this film to the usual 2 hours and 5 minutes or 2 hours and 10 minutes of a film, that you would have had a kind of mobster shoot-'em-up movie which was entirely different than the movie that Martin Scorsese wanted to tell. For movies related to religion, Schindler's List is a similar example. It would be hard to see how you could tell that story in less time. And again, I think that's over 3 hours in length. And to take a contemporary example, there is a television program called The Story of God by Morgan Freeman. This is a 3-season story. It takes 3 seasons to tell the story. There are roughly 15 episodes in the story. And when you think of that, it's interesting because if you take out one chapter, one episode, it changes the entire story. So for Morgan Freeman to put this together, to tell his story, he needs 15 hours. And nobody's going to go to the theater for 15 hours to watch a film. So now I think of religion and television. The issue isn't film versus television. It's short stories versus longer stories. And if we're going to include both shorter stories and longer stories, then television becomes just the mechanism for telling longer stories. So, in 1997, we wanted to focus on movies. And after all of the differences that have taken place, all the changes that have taken place in film and media, I think now that we ought to consider television as a mechanism for expanding the way in which filmmakers can tell their stories. Thanks again for joining us for this summer seminar, and I now turn this over to my colleagues.
Thank you so much for that, Bill. And again, I just mentioned, but you saw Bill in a earlier recording, but Bill is actually with us. So if you have a question for Bill, don't hesitate. You can leave it at the Q&A button and we'll get back to your question later on. Let me introduce our next guest to you, our next speaker, which is Amir Hussain. We're going to Los Angeles. So we're moving to the other side of the country right now. Amir Hussain is chair and professor of the theological studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. He teaches courses on Islam and comparative religion. From 2011 to 2015, Amir was the editor of the Journal of American Academy of Religion. And he's currently the vice president of the American Academy of Religion. So without further ado, Amir.
Good morning, everyone from Los Angeles. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I want to thank Miranda for doing this, introducing us. Thanks to John, to Bill, and to Ken. Courtney's behind the scenes here, so thank you. And thank you all for being here. I want to put a little PowerPoint up here for you, which I think will help illustrate some of the points that I want to make. So hopefully you're able to, sorry, I just need to click on the right link here. So hopefully you're able to see the slide here. I figured I'd start with a nice title, Ginsu Knives, Vanilla Ice. You'll see why. And I'm from Hollywood. Some thoughts on film, television, religion. It's important to start with the Journal of Religion Film. And what Bill Blizek and Ron Burke did in 1997 was extraordinary, visionary. What this journal has meant really can't be overstated. You know, in the 1990s, no one was having these serious conversations about religion in film. Now at the AAR, you can't but have conversations about religion in film. This really changed the field, you know, in the study of religion. Just extraordinarily visionary thing to do. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge Bill and Ron, you know, for putting this together. And when they did it, it really was about religion in film. You know, not about religion music, not about religion popular culture, not about religion television, religion in film. Any great journal really needs to do that. Here's our audience. This is what we're writing for, you know. But there's been changes, you know, since 1997. And we see some of that. You know, I was just, in fact, last week teaching a religion and film class, and we're using this film, Network. You know, Patty Chayefsky won Academy Award for his screenplay, just sort of skewering television. You see Peter Finch in that Howard Beale role. It was just sort of extraordinary there. And the huge issue with network television was, of course, the commercials, you know, the Ginsu knives. Those of us that grew up in the late 70s, early 80s watched these commercials. But wait, there's more. But wait, there's more. Order now. You get a second set. You know, every 6 minutes, you're seeing this on TV. And that's a real issue. You know, commercial television really was about the commercials, really was about selling you product, not about the work. But then I started thinking and wondering, well, is there a false dichotomy here? And I thought again of something from the 1990s, and that's my boy Rob Van Winkle, Miranda. Shout out to another Dutch person there. Had to include that. Known as Vanilla Ice, sort of popularly, from Dallas. White boy rapper in the 1990s. Ice Ice Baby was the big song, and I've tried to find it, but I couldn't go through the Rolling Stone archives quickly enough. Chuck D, the founder of Public Enemy, that's a beautiful Jeanette Beckman photograph of him. Rolling Stone was, I think, trying to get like the angry black man response to this white boy rapper and hoped he would skewer sort of Ice Ice Baby. And Chuck D turned out and said, no, first of all, that's a great song. I tried to sign that guy to Def Jam Records because I knew this was going to be a million seller. When I started, I'm speaking as Chuck D, when I started, in the shows, you're selling your cassettes out of the trunk of your car. You're trying to push your product. And so I'm thinking, maybe there's this false dichotomy, between art and commercialism. Isn't this just about trying to sell what you have, put what you have out there? And then if you think about this town, I live in Los Angeles, Hollywood, the other illusion was the blessed Andy Kaufman, and I'm a wrestling fan, so that's him in the famous match with Jerry the King Lawler. And it's great, I'm from Hollywood, I have the brains, but this idea that in Hollywood, it's all about the Benjamin, it's all about the money. People don't make great films in order to win awards. No studio does that. They make films in order to make money and to make lots of money, to make significant amounts of money. So again, I think that commercial boundary, gets crossed a little bit. And it certainly got crossed 2 weeks ago, when they made the announcement that Amazon is now going to be buying MGM. So the Arts for Art's Sake studio, is now going to a Bond villain, Jeff Bezos, who now owns the Bond films. It's really interesting. What will this mean? And that's really the conversation that Bill and John started about the streaming platforms, those kinds of things. But I think there's something here about television in particular. And I want to say a little bit about this. My own work happens to be on Islam in America. And I think about my own life. Like I first heard about this, the history of African slaves in the Americas, through LeVar Burton on TV with Roots. I was a poor kid, working class kid. We didn't have money to go to the movies, but we could watch TV. I mean, it took us a couple of years before we got a TV, but we got a TV long before we went to the movies. And so I think there's an economic thing here. Like, who gets to watch the movies? Who has that privilege, that luxury of being able to go and now spend like $19.95 to go to the movies, and see that. So I think there's something here about television and the images here. So I'm just showing some images of Muslims on television. Naveen Andrews playing Said Jara on Lost. First regular Muslim character on American TV, Eamon Walker playing the Imam Kareem Saeed, on Tom Fontana's Oz. Showtime, we're talking about cable TV, did this thing post 9/11, Sleeper Cell. With Michael Ealy, there's a shot from the show, Michael Ealy and Oded Fehr, looking at sort of terrorism and things. Comedies, Aliens in America. If you look at the young man, Adair Kalayan, the South African actor on the right, he's now United States of Al. And I'm watching that show going, wait, I remember that guy. That guy was the guy from Aliens in America, which just goes to show, I think there's 6 South Asian actors who are working in the industry. So that's another issue there. And they keep, recasting the folks. Danny Pudi and Iqbal Theba from Community. I know there's folks from Canada, so you have to do the shout out to the Canadian television and Little Mosque on the Prairie. I worked on Saving Grace, Holly Hunter's 3 seasons on TNT, extraordinary show in which religion really was one of the key elements there. There's a story arc there, and Bill very much talked about the story arcs and how you can tell stories. Bokeem Woodbine's character, Leon Washington, an inmate who converts to Islam in prison, which often happens. The streaming services. Rami Youssef has talked about the fact that he wouldn't have gotten the show that he has, Rami, with the critical acclaim that it has, had it not been for Hulu and streaming platforms. What network is going to put together a show by a young Egyptian Muslim comedian? There's no money in that. There's no market for that. Well, Hulu is able to do this, And then back to broadcast television, Madam Secretary. This episode from 2018, during the administration of He Who Shall Not Be Named, where there was concerns about Muslims, and this was about the Secretary of State Tia Leone's character, doing an iftar for Muslims, and it tied in with events that were actually happening in Turkey. And I'll stop here with my own, little bit of work of Bill very kindly mentioned Story of God with Morgan Freeman. I consult on the show. This is still from the show with Mr. Freeman and Muhammad Zakaria, the calligrapher. But that's really the ending point that I want to make here is about the story arcs here, that you can tell a story, and I'll stop the share there. You can tell a story over 10 episodes, 12 episodes, 2 seasons, 3 seasons that you just simply can't tell in film, unless you're going to do 15 hours worth of film. So I think in the 21st century, particularly in 2021, I'm actually in favor of including television and streaming platforms in that discussion of religion and film. And I'm looking forward to our conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amir. All right, on to our final speaker of this, I want to say evening, because it just turned evening over here, but it's probably morning or afternoon where you guys are at. Let me introduce Ken White to you. He's a poet, he's a screenwriter. He co-wrote and co-produced the feature film Winter in the Blood. He co-directed and co-wrote the short film Universal VIP, as well as co-wrote the short film The Conservationist. That just is a hard word for me. Currently in development as a feature, which White will also be directing. He has done many more things, but finally this thing. He's written and co-written over a dozen feature scripts, and is currently working on a psychological horror featured Wed the Dark, and that kind of brought a lot of fear into me, because that is the genre that freaks me out the most when it comes to movies. So without further ado, Ken.
Thank you, Miranda, and thank you everyone for the invitation. I'm coming at it from a very practical perspective, and one of the things I look at relative to forms is it's all malleable. If we're looking at shorts, we're looking at really short shorts or short features or features, and then it's just a degree of increment. And so one of the things I'm particularly interested in is what's the function of the role of stories or narrative in our lives at all. And if we're trying to make meaning, so why would we differentiate among the shape or the form of it? As a matter of fact, in terms of this visual cinematic narrative, that the more we can incorporate, the more facets, more angles we have to begin to develop a broader scope or a broader vision of what our meaning making and the ways that we entertain one another, by also being in these direct and genuine relationships with what it means to be alive, what it means to exist. So that's part of it in terms of the functional role of story. But then relative to a journal, I'm thinking of it in terms of the functional role of criticism itself, or analysis, or film review. So why are we doing this? So what we're trying to do is try to form some sort of scaffolding of analytical meaning around this other shape of expressive or creative meaning. So where those two meet, that Venn diagram slides as we wish it to slide. So we have that sort of agency. One of the things I'm thinking about when I think about film is it's such a, feature film in particular, it's such a digestible unit. It's made to be a digestible unit, so that we have a primary, it's usually a primary protagonist. It's difficult to make a two, even in an Altman film, someone with multiple protagonists and multiple strands, and it's a very kind of contiguous moving camera all the time. There's still someone who is the central, it's like the root note of that particular chord, and everyone else arranges around that. And from that central protagonist, each character is designed to also have a relationship with that central dramatic premise, or a theme or a concern, but that's used to shape, like drawing a form using only negative space, and then the center negative space becomes the protagonist. Now, that's a unit of transformation. In television, there are two ways to do that. One is it's episodic. Well, it says all episodic, but one is a standalone episode in which, like a police drama, a procedural film. You see them with ER, or all the things where there's a problem that is initiated. They solve the problem, but they don't solve their problems. They don't solve the characters don't develop in that way, because if the characters transform to the degree that they need to in order to transcend and become, the death of a former identity and the birth of another, then the series ends. So it's a built-in limitation that perpetuates the lifespan of the series. The other element is the serial form of the episodes, in which you're looking at the relationship across the arc of each episode, or not episode, but each season. So each season has its own identity in life. For example, something like, Sopranos or The Wire, which were those series really started to kind of break open this new prestige television where production values went way up. These are not studio sets, they're shot like feature films on location. Those kinds of things allow us to have the kind of duration, but we're watching on screen that they can solve elements of their kind of primary wound or major malfunction, but if they solve it all the way, it ends. So one of the premises of a feature film is that you have to there's a problem that is solved within a certain amount of time. And there we see a transformation, whether it results in redemption or results in tragedy. Still, we get to see it in that amount of time. But if you do that with television, it ends. However, when I'm thinking about what that does for us as humans and how much we get to engage with that form, with television, we get to have this, it's the differences in duration, we get to have a sustained relationship and participate for for a much longer time. It's not just about duration. If we think about it, it's also a vastly democratized process, especially Amir, you mentioned that television was more accessible to us, or like if you can afford to take the family out to a theater, or I was raised in the deep country, you have to go all the way into town, travel hours even to get to a place where they have a theater. You could probably get 3 channels if you moved your antennas around correctly. But you could process that. And so not only did it unify us collectively, but it also became part of, John, you mentioned myth and ritual. We're using this collective cultural mythology, but we also have the ritual of gathering around this thing that we can all have access to. And we do it in terms of the interval. We can do it every week at the same time. And that became part of our collective cultural ritual. That's a fascinating role. I mean, this is a role that it's also, if we're remembering, all of us kind of brightened up at the mention of Ginsu knives, because it became a signifier of a certain era of television that we can all respond to. And that is part of what television is also doing now. So it democratizes the writing process now in the era of prestige television, in which you have more voices in the room at one time. So you have in the writer's room several people who have been arranged as a team to approach this problem, those voices. And then it's the writer's medium rather than the director's medium. Further democratizes the way in which people are using their kind of visual, their cinematic idiolect to put their vision, the quote unquote vision, on each episode. Except it's not auteur theory. It's not the entire realm of a single or co-director who makes those choices. The directors come and go in television. It's that whole room and the culture around the world of the show that does that. And they are also able to do it over time. So when I think about, yes, there are a lot of excellent catchphrases from many excellent movies, and I love film. I obviously love feature film. But if you think about a show like The Office, that becomes cognate language. People can associate that and come in and start having conversations about The Office. It's not how's the weather, how's this. It's they can drop a quote and start to assess that. And that has a deep cultural influence over years. Where it doesn't matter. You name it, a really culturally influential system, and it's the way in which we participate in it. And it reminds me of, because the form is a loose scaffolding into which we can pour whatever the data of that particular episode is. It reminds me of the oral tradition in which a storyteller or a series of storytellers would distribute across the countryside, telling versions of that story, not the same story, but versions of the same story to people. And that's how they brought access, and that's how they arrived at a particular kind of culture. So the power and the influence and the breadth, the scope, the depth and duration of television. This is the dominant narrative form of our time. And that's also scooping into including games. video games. These are the way. This is how people participate. It's a language. We're all learning this cinematic vocabulary, and that cinematic vocabulary because of the change in the way that democratization of distribution models, but also the production value that John mentioned is that if you're shooting the Game of Thrones, you were shooting 8 to 10 feature films per season, and it's going that way for, I don't know, 5 to 8 seasons. That's a generation. You've just had an influence on a generation of people culturally across the world. And that is something that a single film can't do. So as Amir said, as Bill said, it's the form. It's an accordion form. And you just have to choose where you participate in it. But it's not something that I think we can differentiate between or among, I guess, if we're including a short film, because it's all fulfilling a different purpose. It's all fulfilling a different function. It's all being distributed in different ways, and you can choose the ways in which people engage it on different platforms. They can go out for the big experience. They can stay in for the intimate experience. They can binge it all the way through and get it in terms of density. They can watch it in terms of the interval at which it's released, and they are able to. It's a movable feast, and you can generate your own ritual and your own relationships around it. And it's actually our relationship with story is our relationship with ourselves, and our relationship with story, whether it's feature film or television, is also the way that we relate to everyone else. And so it just becomes that another, it's almost like neural pathways being generated, the ways in which people participate in all of these narratives. So clearly, I'm very much, I just don't differentiate among those. I'm very much in favor of the inclusion of that sort of analysis, because it's really talking about the stories we've told from the beginning of time and seen. That's good.
Thank you for that, Ken. Thank you so much. I noticed that I really want to get into everything you've been saying, but that's not out yet. We have the Q&A for that. So if you're sitting behind your screen, you want to go, but I want to know more. I have more questions. We have room for that in the Q&A. Write down your questions. We'll get to them a little later. But before we do that, let me get back to John Lyden.
Yeah, I just want, before we go into the opportunity for a discussion among the panelists, and again, don't hesitate to put your question in the Q&A field there if you are watching. And again, you have that opportunity, so think about what questions you may want to ask. I want to problematize this a little bit more, because what I've kind of heard from all the panelists is that this line probably doesn't really exist anymore in the way it once did, so maybe it's going away. But again, because this is sort of a referendum on the topics that our journal treats, among other things, let me raise a few issues about that before we throw it open to discussion. So on the one hand, the line between these categories does seem ephemeral, seems artificial, seems constantly in flux. And as the technology and the models for delivery of content have evolved, we can't really return to those categories that were developed in a time when film really did mean something shown in a movie theater, and television was shown, well, on television, obviously. Now, as a number of the panelists have pointed out, we consume content in a variety of ways. Maybe we're alone, maybe we're in a group, maybe we watch it repeatedly over and over, or episodically, or as a single one-time dose. You know, if I sit down in front of a season of a streaming show and I don't get up and the episodes just keep coming, I'm sort of watching it as one thing. We may watch it on small screens when we're on the go. We may watch it on big screens in our own houses. People have home theaters. And also, as has been pointed out, there's a lot of good episodic streaming content that I might like to consider as part of our journal and as part of our study of this topic. I'm interested in those things as well. On the other hand, to erase the line completely, we could say might dilute our historic focus on feature films, which are usually more self-contained, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. So again, to reference Aristotle's definition of drama once again, as opposed to endless individual episodes that may or may not interconnect very well. And again, a number of you have pointed out that television has become very episodic. It didn't used to be, though, where episodes link together in a continuing story necessarily. You could drop in and just watch a single episode and maybe not even know the characters. So that's how television was designed when it first appeared. So you could watch maybe an episode of Gunsmoke and you didn't have to have watched the other 400 episodes of Gunsmoke or whatever, or even the original Star Trek. although there was some continuing things. You could basically watch a standalone episode. And so I'm not sure I want to have episodes, or rather articles submitted to the journal on just one episode of Gunsmoke. That might not be interesting enough. And that's not to say that these and other television programs are not worthy of consideration by scholars of media, scholars of popular culture, scholars of religion and media and popular culture together. But are they films? Are they films? And why do I keep coming back to this question? Maybe I'm just being a snob about films, which might surprise me though, because as many of you know, I do not just focus on high art films. And also I do like television. I did grow up watching a lot of television during the era that included Twilight Zone and Star Trek and All in the Family and MASH, and shows that commented on issues that were going on at the time. All those are worthy of study still. But the line was clearer between things then. And of course, also, we have to point out that the definition of television is itself in question. Broadcast television is fighting for its life versus streaming video. And sometimes those are viewed as different things. But if I access all this content online anyway, what does it matter? I can watch shows that are broadcast on the ABC television network in the United States through the website abc.com with or without a cable television subscription. I do not have a cable television subscription, actually. I can also watch all the streaming shows of Star Wars and Marvel on Disney Plus, as well as all the movies and all the shows there. Is that television? Is that a movie? I could actually right now publish an article in the journal on something like WandaVision or The Mandalorian, because of course they reference movies. They're TV shows, but they're connected to movies. But now I'm allowing a technicality to allow me to publish something. So maybe I'm avoiding the point here. Do these distinctions matter? And why do I seem to care? I don't know, maybe I care more than the rest of you. And I'm not sure if I care, but I feel like I'm hanging on to something here that is important to point out in a difference. But maybe it's time to let that difference go. So if I hear clearly from all of you, from the panelists, from those of you who are watching, from the journal's audience in general, that we should not be excluding submissions just because it deals solely with what we might call television rather than film, I will certainly listen to that. I'm genuinely interested in your opinion. It reflects this changing media climate we've been referencing, and we need to be able to pivot to that. But maybe there are reasons not to do that. So if so, I want to hear those reasons as well. And again, to reference the Ginsu steak knives that have been talked about quite a bit so far this morning, operators are standing now to take your call, as the ads used to say. And if you order now, you may get that set of steak knives and the bamboo steamer, which we could throw in as well. So let the discussion begin.
And I'll gladly throw in an original Dutch kaasschaaf for with that to make it a really true bargain. Did you know that we didn't have the Ginsu steak knife ad here in the Netherlands, but we did get similar ads over here, and they were dubbed. So they were still ridiculously long, but they were dubbed really badly in Dutch, and that actually made it more fascinating. It's like a train accident. You have to watch it for some reason. I lost a lot of precious time on that, but that aside, it's time for the Q&A, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start off with a question first for Bill. Bill, are you ready?
Yes.
All right, here he comes. Now, if television programs are no longer a factor in rejecting material for the publication in an academic journal, what criteria will be used to decide whether essays about television programs will be included for publication? Because I assume you'll need some criteria.
Well, when we started and we were talking about TV and film, it all seemed clearer at that particular time. But now I think the issue has more to do with seeing all of these things, as Ken was suggesting, as storytelling. And what we're interested in are stories, and how we get those stories visually seems to me to be less important. So you might ask now, what criterion would we use for accepting an article on a television program. And there, it seems to me, it would be pretty much the same kind of criteria that we use for selecting one for an essay on film. They ought to be well written. In the early days of the journal, I was astounded at how many faculty couldn't write an essay. They should have a point. They shouldn't simply ramble or retell the story. If there's something important to be said, there ought to be an argument or evidence for it. We ought to see that. The same sort of thing that we would use in selecting an essay for publication that was devoted to a film. And then I think John mentioned this, and I think this is probably very important. We would also select something that we think our readers would find important or interesting. Brent Plate talks about finding the Jesus figure in a movie and claiming that it's a movie about religion and film. But there are so many movies in which somebody appears in cruciform that it's and they're not particularly interesting. But we got to keep in mind that the criteria, whatever they are, have to be applied by the editor in consultation with the reviewers. And that, I think, is always a matter of judgment. And different editors would make different judgments about that. But that doesn't affect allowing us to accept essays that deal with television programming.
So are we looking at a new name for the journal then?
You'll have to ask John. Remember, I'm retired.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. It's because of your youthful look, Bill. John, a new name for the journal.
Well, I don't know if I want to take the responsibility for that. That seems like a very big issue. Maybe we wouldn't have to change it if we're defining film broadly enough. And again, as I pointed out, nothing is really on film anymore anyway. People still talk about films, but what actually was called film originally is not the technology that exists anymore that we are utilizing. So, maybe it is time to broaden our scope in that way. And as Bill pointed out, is it interesting? Is it significant? Are you making an argument? I would say too, all of us who work in the area of popular culture studies generally know that sometimes people think, anything goes in this, and they can sort of write something that's not very good. It doesn't really matter, right? Because it's popular culture, or people don't take this work seriously. In fact, it's just like with anything else. There's good scholarship and poor scholarship, and you can write a paper about anything and pull it off. You have a point to make, you've got the right sources, and it's significant. So we make judgments about scholarship of all sorts. You can write a bad and boring article about the 13th century the same way you can do it about the Avengers, or you can write a great article about both. So in that sense, it really is about the quality of what the person brings to it and what they see in it, and can they show that this is something significant that we ought to be talking about.
Clear. Thanks, John. I'm moving to the Q&A little screen that I have. If you want to post a question out in there, you can, please do. I'm going to take it from the top. Start up with Micah Dunwoody. It's a question for Amir. Amir, in relation to the Rami character that you described, Rami not existed without the Hulu accepting it, the screening service Hulu. It seems like there's media which would not exist without streaming services. Is that correct? I think that's Micah's question. And if so, that would be huge considering how much pop culture is centered on it. Could you elaborate on that, Amir?
Absolutely. And thanks for that, Micah. That's a great question. And absolutely. I mean, when those streaming services first came out, it really was about the service. It wasn't about the content. It's like the whole idea sort of turned it on its head, that it was like, oh, let's have this vehicle to put this stuff out there, and then we'll come up with the stuff that we'll put out there, really, really interesting kinds of things. And so the partnerships that you see and the conglomerations, the movements are fascinating. So I think there is something there. I want to tie that also to something that Ken had said around the shared culture, because I think that's important, that, we talk about I remember a conversation with Richard Schickel, the film critic for Time magazine, and he talked about ever since he was a kid, like he'd walk into a movie theater and that experience of being in the theater and it gets dark and you watch this thing and you come out and you're sort of slightly blurry eyed and you're transformed. And so I understand that and the collective experience. But as Ken pointed out, we have that on television. Much more folks were talking about, oh, did you see that episode of Game of Thrones? Did you see that episode of so and so? And so there's that shared kind of culture. And now going back to Micah's question, the streaming stuff allows for it. And so in Zoom, you had like these watch parties, where you could watch stuff together from your separate homes. And that's a whole different kind of thing. So I think precisely that moment of doing this, and I think without getting into the other broader question, I think, yeah, at some level, sure, you have to make lines. I say that as someone who works in religion and music. I think there's pretty clear differences between music and whatever you want to say, visual culture, film and television, as distinct from, popular culture, other sorts of things. So absolutely, you don't just say, oh, well, now we're talking about religion and culture, so what can't you? Let me stop there. Wilfrid Laurier University had a Department of Religion and Culture, and I was like, what can't you put under religion and culture? Like by definition, everything would fit into that.
Thanks, Amir. I have another question here from, this is from Joel Mayward. It's a question for all the panelists. So gentlemen, pay attention. This seems a common focus here. It seems a common focus here has been on story and length, rather than questions of ontology or cinematic forms and aesthetics. Recent cinematic works like Bo Burnham Inside or Twin Peaks The Return. Oh, really? I completely missed that. I'm in another part of the world. Seems to be less interested in story than affect, image, and exploring the limits of cinema itself. How might one begin to define film and or TV beyond simply focusing on story and duration? Thank you for that, Joel. Ken, you want to take this one?
I would love to get a good start on it. Thanks for the question, Joel. So for me, story is the entire world of you step into the realm of whatever's going on there, and it's different from structure, and it's different from plot. And so the structure fits within the story, the plot fits within the structure. And so it's not really about length. We can break down most music videos do this. Most successful advertisements do this. They have that Aristotelian beginning, middle, and end that John was talking about, and they happen in relative to ratios to themselves. So, for example, the Bo Burnham Inside, it's absolutely about story. That's one of the things. The art isn't hiding the art. What it's doing is it's holding itself together using these interior guy wires that are pinning elements together. And if I just watched it a few days ago, so example, at intermission, that's your midpoint, but right before that, it's when he's reviewing himself, a younger version of himself on the screen. At the end of the second act is when he breaks down in tears and it feels real. So that entire decline is his deterioration into something that becomes more real and less performative, even though I know it's all curated. And you'll note that the image systems are the same. At the very end of the third act, we see him viewing himself again. All of that are these image systems built within the structure that we respond to viscerally. We know we are conditioned to. It's one of our most fluent forms in what's happening. He incriminates himself up to probably white woman Instagram, and then afterward it's accelerating all the way up to the midpoint, and then it's decelerating down to his decline. And it's the same sort of structure that you would see in any Pixar film. It's the same sort of structure you see in most, I mean, I'm thinking of particular, music videos. It's all there. So it's all structural. And that is the thing that is holding it together regardless of size. And one of the things I was noting about when we were talking about what could be included in the journal is that we never were talking about the subject. We were always talking about how the approach to the subject. So that should tell us something, that it could be, or if we're talking about episode, when Amir mentioned Game of Thrones, I thought, yes, but you could write a very good essay on the Red Wedding, because when we say the Red Wedding, if you've seen it, you know what we're talking about, because it's a pinnacle turning point. Now that pinnacle turning point over the course of that series, over the course of that particular year, that also holds a structural role. And the structural role is similar to the midpoint or a massive reversal within that. So you just have to expand or contract regardless of scale. Yeah, so it's really structured, to me, and structures within the story, and it doesn't matter the size. It's a great question. I hope that gives at least a perspective on it.
Thanks, Jack. Hey, Miranda, if I could say something
Yeah, please.
here, and I'm just going to put a thing in the chat in response to another question that Tony Michael asks. I'm going to give a shout out to Tony, who's one of our attendees. It was Tony who actually got me when I was first teaching a course on religion and film, doing this thing of you just show a little 5-minute clip and you show it over and over again. And it's like, okay, this time watch the dialogue or listen for the dialogue. This time, listen for the background music, the soundtrack. This time, look at the camera angles. This time, look at the direction. And so that kind of thing, like, you know, it's we've been talking, and you're right to point out, we've been talking about the story and the arc, but there's so much more to it. It's the acting, and it's hilarious watching good and bad actors now and getting that sense of, oh man, that guy's astonishing, or that guy was just awful, and I wonder how he got that part, you know. So of course it's about, you know, the acting. It's about the shots. I mean, I used Steve McQueen's the director, not the actor, Hunger, his film about Bobby Sands and the hunger strike. And there's like a 14-minute shot where it's like a straight on camera that doesn't break for 14 minutes. And when it does, it's so jarring that you realize, wait, I was just watching the same camera angle for 14 minutes. I mean, just so those kinds of things I think are so powerful. And so I think absolutely there's so much of this that goes into whether we're talking about television or film there. And then the piece that I put in the chat was the book Diane Winston had done a couple of years ago at Baylor, Small Screen, Big Picture, about television and religion, and looking at television on religion.
Thanks, Amir. Anyone else wants to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to throw in on that too. Yeah, Diane Winston's book is a great book on TV and religion, and also Cutter Calloway has written on religion and television as well. So that's a good book to use on that. And again, this is a kind of research I've become more and more aware of in recent years, and just so much good work being done there. Yeah, I agree with everything that Ken and Amir said about the medium, and good question from Joel about that, and how the level of artistry that's been introduced, and even kind of experimentation in television, you know, as well as film. So it's, the day is gone, long gone, when film was the artsy thing and television was not. At the same time, I would say even something that has bad production values might be worth writing about. Like, you think about the old Dark Shadows show. Yeah, I'm going back to my youth here, but it was terrible. But it was campy, and it was very badly done and shot live and had all these mistakes. But there's a cult around it. There's practically a religion around it, a big fan base. And so you can look at that as a religious experience, how audience reception, even around something that has poor production values, can be worthy of our study if there's something maybe to talk about how the audience has interacted with that and what they get out of it. There's people who base their lives on Dark Shadows, which is a little strange to me, but you know, who am I to judge? So.
Well, if we think about even how it was blurred, the scene, Amir, that you mentioned, Hunger, that's a theatrical technique. And so when you saw that it's just a medium two shot, two people static, having a conversation, so it's execution dependent. If they're not good acting, it's a dead scene. And then once we skip out, I think it also stays in the scene another 4-ish minutes. And then we just have some overs. And so it's the kiss of death usually in cinema. Except it's a theatrical technique, so it blurs it back. And so that modulating that length of the scene, or the focus of the intention, that's a risk that McQueen was taking. But that's another thing that you see usually so frequently, films that are based on plays, that was not, failed because they take up some of those theatrical elements. Instead, what McQueen was doing was varying that. So it's just a broad embrace of possibility when it comes to experimentation, and what you're saying about film. John, and then there was some other thing about the last thing you said that I'm sorry, I lost it. But it seemed profound at the moment, you know?
It'll get back to you, Ken.
Yeah.
John, would you be willing to put the name of those authors in the book in the chat? Because it might be interesting for some people that are, or perhaps everybody knows these authors and has these books, but I for one, don't. Just
yeah, I think Amir shared a link. I'll put Cutter's name in and so his work. Yeah, if I can
Thank
do
you.
that. Yeah, I'll do that while we're talking. Okay.
All right, I'll move forward to a question from Martha Scott. Thank you for being with us, Martha. If TV/film can be an educational tool, do you feel that TV may be a better medium to educate viewers about religion, since it allows for more in-depth exploration of religion and faith? I tend to put this one on your lap, Amir, since you've been you worked on a show, on a TV show that's all about religion.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating kind of thing. And just tying back to the last question, living in Los Angeles for 25 years now, you understand that this is the industry. Like, I grew up in Southern Ontario, and it was the auto industry. And so many jobs are connected to it. One of the things we could have talked about, and I don't think he's on the call or on the Zoom, but Ryan Parker, who does great work on public relations and promotion. And that was something I never thought about, that, oh yeah, how do you promote this? How do you sell this and do this kind of stuff there? But that goes back to, I think, the heart of this question, is that for so long films were these big budget things, much more exclusive. We talk about how many women have been nominated for or won, best director or things like that. Well, I look at these shows that the two shows that I was talking about. The one that I worked on, Saving Grace, Nancy Miller, did the show. She was a showrunner. Madam Secretary Barbara Hall, who did Joan of Arcadia, was a showrunner for that. So just on the two of the things that I've had some involvement with, it's been women who have been driving these kinds of things in a way that in Hollywood they might not have been able to do. So I think that there's that part to it. I think part of it is that sense of, if you're using it for educational, didactic sorts of purposes, and I have to be very careful here, because I worship at the altar of Neil Postman, and I sign, amusing ourselves to death as often as I can about the problems of education and entertainment. And I say to my students all the time, look, I am not Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society for two very different reasons. One, I don't have Robin's acting chops. You get me. Two, and this is to Ken, I don't have his writers. I'm writing this stuff myself. It's not good. And so I think that, you're conscious about that part of things, but I think absolutely you can use television in that kind of way, and part of it in that episodic sort of way, especially in the classroom, that traditional sort of classroom. Oftentimes it's much easier to show like a 20-minute or 10-minute clip of a TV series than it is, of a film where you have to sort of, look at the arc of the story there. But absolutely, I think there's some really interesting things you can do in terms of education with television. That goes back to the thing, and I'll stop here, with even with the breakdown of network TV, cable TV, streaming services. I have this one and this one. I don't have this one, this one, and this one. I need someone's password so I can watch this. Because I'm not going to buy that service just to watch that one show. But what do you do there? It's still, I think, a more democratic thing. And again, I'm conscious of what Ken said. Living in LA, where you do have a large proportion of films, and even here, I remember when I first moved here, there were like 400 screens that were showing films, and Robert Duvall's The Apostle had just come out, this great film about religion film. That was literally showing at like 3 screens in Los Angeles. I'm like, wait, that's Robert Duvall who's got a film and it's showing on like 3 screens? Where is it showing in the rest of the country? And so, are you able to access things in a more popular way through television?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Amir. Bill, would you like to add anything to that?
No.
Okay, clear. So next question is for Ken. It's from an anonymous attendee, very mysterious. Ken, would you say series, in contrast to films, have also democratized perspectives and narratives on multicultural forms of religion?
I can't speak to the religious element, but I can say in terms of multicultural form, and it's more about opportunity. And I think that each show has its own culture. Each writer's room has its own build, the world of each story. And I've noticed that has been, thank goodness, radically changing over the past, say, decade. And it's been changing late and accelerating in that change in the makeups of the different kinds of voices in the room, so that the voices in the room also look a little bit more like the world, rather than more about like a dominant demographic within a select piece of Hollywood. So that changes from show to show, but it's getting better. But what I can say is that because it's a it's a multi-protagonist, multi-main character world, the opportunity of serialized television. And so you're able to not only have all of those voices, but some characters get their own episodes, or the focus of that episode is on that character's arc. And so instead of following a primary strand, which is reflecting one person based on the shape of their wound, absence, or lack, how they try to become whole in order to lose the death of their, or to gain a death of identity and transform, instead you have a panoply of those. And so wherever you're able to hook into that piece, then you can experience many different, I guess, arcs within over the course of several years if this series goes well. In terms of just if you're only watching, and I do this too, watching a single feature film again and again and again to take different things from it, the character has the same change. The thing that's changed is you. So each time that ideally you've changed by watching it the first time, so your experience generates a richer experience or richer understanding, and then watch it 6 months later or 6 years later, and then you're different and you see it, and that way you grow, and then your relationship with the art changes. And then over the course of, you know, a 5-year series, you're invested with these people frequently as if family, because you watch them grow, and you've watched them grow or die or lose or regain people. And frequently, one of the things that happens, say, with The Wire, the valence of influence expands. So if you look at something like feature film Chinatown, so maybe we all have access to that, the level of conflict starts very personally, and it breaks out wider and wider and wider until it's all, you know, corruption of Los Angeles. Each season of something like The Wire or Breaking Bad, it starts very personally and small, but the valence of influence, the valence of connection, and all the ways in which kind of the dendrites arc out from that central nerve nexus of our relationship with the first person that we identify with shifts and changes. And so that allows us to have flexible perspectives relative to multiple voices. And that's the closest thing I can get in terms of not just multiculturally, but in terms of just various experiences and various kinds of change, all organized around this central guiding dramatic premise, which gives us the opportunity to explore different things, even if that's not what we would have thought of, or that's not the character with whom we first identified. So, dear Anonymous, if I hope that gives some perspective on it, at least from my limited perspective.
Thank you for that, Ken. And moving on to the question of Paul Williams. If the boundary between film and television is increasingly blurred and warrants opening up the discussion and framing in terms of longer stories, shorter stories, would that logically extend to the gaming world? For example, World of Warcraft, where the audience is participating in and co-creating a story that is open-ended / unfinished. And if not, why not? I think this one's for you as well, Ken, since you mentioned games. But other gentlemen, please join if you also have something to say about that. But let's start with you, Ken.
I'll try to be brief. I say absolutely, because again, it's influencing culture. And also there's a lot of cross-pollination between and among film and games. So it's a similar culture, even with the actors and also with the writers. So if you can write for film, you can also write. A lot of screenwriters have more opportunities in the burgeoning game business, and also the entire industry is I mean, if it hasn't already eclipsed. Again, because it's, you can have a box and you can connect with people all over, you know, in a multiplayer role game. I'm not a gamer, but multiplayer role game, you're connecting with people via generating narrative and participating in narrative. And that's what we're doing, I think, at the smallest degree. You know, if you're making a single visual image represented on a static screen, i.e. a canvas or a board, we're still doing very similar thing where we're having meaning making by interacting with this thing. And I think that gaming is a very fluid and fluent live, it's happening in real time or interaction, so I don't know why we would exclude it. It's just, I don't know if the criteria would be the same, because it doesn't have endpoints. Or you can just play that game and stop it, but it's just like the nervous system. It just goes and goes and goes and goes. So you just have to choose you have to choose a movable bracket where you can just use that as the window, of access into it. I'm clearly, I'm kind of have a Catholic small c sense of include all of this. Like, yes, if it's narrative, if it's story, and if it tells us how to live or asks us questions about how to be, then it's in the game, it's in the conversation. And to exclude that for the purposes of analysis, fine, because we need to set a limit. But you have to include it in terms of the broader conversation because they're all part.
Yeah, and I want to support what you're saying too, Ken, because I just put a title in the chat, Rachel Wagner's book, God Wired, which is just an excellent book from just a couple of years ago, where she looked at video computer games and all the aspects you're talking about, the interactive aspect, how the story is in part created by the person who participates. And she's done a lot of writing about, like first person shooter games, and how does the person interact with the violence where they're enacting it as opposed to viewing it, because the voyeuristic aspect is displaced by this participatory aspect, which is very disturbing from certain points of view that one can look a lot more at. And she's just done a lot in this area and looked at how narrative, which we think of as a closed space in a film or even a TV show, in a very different way opens up when you're playing a game and you're in it. So you can play the Godfather game where, you're in the Godfather, and, it all changes. And then sometimes games become movies, and so there's this back and forth interaction, and how a lot of people, interact through those. And again, the production values, the cut scenes in these video games, they're really good. There's people making films as a living who are making these stories for these video games. So it's a whole new world, and that's well worthy of study. I agree.
Just to chime in there, I'm not a gamer, and so I'm not speaking from any personal experience here. I grew up with pinball machines and video games, so I love that, but never got into the gaming kind of thing. But to Ken's point exactly, that where our university sits, literally down the hill from the university, is Electronic Arts. Square Enix is 2 miles away. All the kinds of things here, and that was that moment of, oh yeah, most video game things have like 300 people that are working on them. Only like a dozen of whom are the coding people, like the tech people. They've got more people writing the script. I mean, I had no idea that, wait, there's a writer's room for a video game and you have like a dozen writers who are writing this thing. And then John's point about the actors, the sorts of the blurring of literally video games and film, where you have a number of franchises that are both. The problematic aspect, I say that as someone who writes about Islam and Muslims, some of those first-person shooter games. There's one that I won't mention that's got a lot of controversy in the last couple of months around, is this basically just a license to kill Arabs, kind of thing. What does that do? How does that get used? So for me, I think it falls into that qualifying thing of, we have the phrase at AAR of religion, film, and visual culture, and so it's the visual part that's for me what the key is here. Not that it's about telling a story, because then why would we not include plays or dramas or that kind of thing? Well, because of the filmic visual sort of thing, and that's why I would exclude, as someone who loves religion and music, we're putting that aside here. But I think absolutely there's that sense of the games as part of this visual form through which we tell these stories to understand the world.
Thank you, Amir. I see that we only have 13 minutes left, so let's move on to another question from Joel. A second question for the panel. If there's time, we'll make time in this case, Joel. Could the panelists speak about user-made cinematic streaming content, such as YouTube and TikTok videos, which go beyond the typical productions in studios? Are such cinematic forms films, TV? Are they anything else? Who wants to have a go?
I mean, I can go, but I'm dominant. You do. You go first, Sean. Please, after you, John. I've been talking.
Well, I mean, I'm as the editor of the journal, I'm not sure if somebody submits an article on TikTok videos. I'm not so sure. I mean, maybe they can make it work. I mean, that's been a whole pandemic phenomenon, obviously. But I guess it would depend. Those are definitely very influential media. They interact in a totally different way. They're very simple. They're very short. But again, some of them are seen by millions of people, and the effect of them could be significant. So I guess it would depend. It would depend once again. So hypothetically, could those be considered films? I suppose so. Yeah. And this is where, once you let the genie out of the bottle, it's not going back in. I mean, because the media is going to keep changing. And so where do we draw the line? I guess that's part of my concern about doing this is, Amir references the AR group, which he and I co-chaired together. And Bill also has co-chaired that group, as well as Ruby Ramji, who's also watching, I noticed. And we've been with that group for years and been part of that. And when it changed its title to include visual culture, we did find we could include a lot of things. We didn't always go with that, but that allowed us to do so. But I think that's the kind of question that comes up is, what do we include? What's worthwhile to think about? And maybe it's just a question of good scholarship again, as always, but I'm not sure.
And I think the other part of the question, which I think is a really good one, is about the democratization of this, because again, that's one of the concerns with films. Like back in the day when you talked about studios, who got to make films? Like it was a very small thing, and the number of films that came out and all that kind of stuff there. But then you change that, and now anyone can upload something to YouTube, and it's fascinating because that's a world that I know that world because I've used YouTube, but we've gotten to know the kids next door to us. Have the family next door to us has like a 7-year-old and 2 3-year-olds, and because of the pandemic and they weren't in school, sort of took him in for a little bit, and was talking to the 7-year-old, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a YouTuber. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, that's the thing? Like, that's something that you want to aspire to be? And so that realization of, oh yeah, you can do this and you can make a very good living. I mean, that's the commercial side of it. But I think precisely that sense of who's able to tell a story, who's able to put something out there. And I think of, small filmmakers who would never have gotten a chance to, be on that big screen. I think I started with Robert Duvall. I mean, the fact that Robert Duvall couldn't get that film made by a studio. He had to do it himself. He had to fund that film himself. And I'm like, this is Robert freaking Duvall. Like, this is one of the best actors of our time, and very wealthy, very successful, and good history with the studios. But he can't get a film made unless he makes it himself. One of the films that I reviewed a film for the journal last year, Gurinder Chadha's beautiful Blinded by the Light, this great sort of story about this Muslim family growing up in Mrs. Thatcher's Britain. And you look at those kinds of things, and if Gurinder hadn't been able to do Bend It Like Beckham, would she have been able to do this? And this was like a small thing at Sundance that Warner Brothers had picked up. But I think precisely that sense of, who are these people that are telling the stories? And it is TikTok and YouTube a chance for them to do that in a way they could never do it in the studio system.
Yeah, and a lot of it is not just about the cost of filmmaking, which, as you say, has gone down so much now. You can make a movie on a cell phone, but also distribution. Do you get the distribution? And of course, Sundance has been the most wonderful thing in the world for independent filmmakers, really helped them. But not everybody still gets the market, even through the film festivals. And if stuff just doesn't get seen. We all see good films all the time. We're like, oh, this is a great film. And then it just doesn't go anywhere because somebody has decided it wasn't worth selling. And maybe if they took a chance on it, people might actually like it. So that's the interesting thing about the circuit of culture that plays into all of this. And again, it plays into television, because distribution through television. There's movies that did poorly in the theater that ended up on broadcast television back in the day and just got shown and shown over and over. And that's how we've all seen them, because they got shown on all those local affiliates many times, even if they weren't very good movies. So distribution is a huge thing about this, and not just the production. That's a big piece to keep in mind.
Well, that's part of it, right? Is also the commerce element that Amir said. When you're writing a script, yeah, you're trying to make art and make a document that can bring this home, but really you're also trying to make accountants feel comfortable, so that the algorithm of whom you cast in what part and where that sells in which territory all adds up. Because if those numbers don't add up, it's just a no. I don't care how much they love the script. But if you can fit those pieces together, it's going to work. One of the things that, and this goes back to distribution. I'm sorry. Apparently, people are painting a house next door. If you can hear that. One of the things you said about distribution. So something like Tangerine, that was shot all on cell phones, or very little. that got him to, the director whom I can't think of right now, got him to the Florida Project. Now the Florida Project got traction because of the success relative to size of and excellence of Tangerine, also shot on a cell phone. So, but the thing is, it's all about, because more people have access to this, and this is like the YouTube, the TikTok question or reference. There's also, it's harder to rise above the crowd and be noticed. So the way in which people get traction, and this is the other thing that's hierarchical, is how do people market? Who has access to that kind of those marketing channels? Who gets chosen, picked up, and it's pretty much, you can take 100 films that are of similar quality. Let's just use that number. Take 3 of them, put them at the front, and just run those, so that starts to generate its own sort of currency based on exposure. Now that's where, like, who gets to make films? A lot of people do now. Who gets to have their films championed by a powerful marketing piece that will determine what sort of distribution they get? That's the other part that becomes another sort of gateway. Yeah. Regardless of production value, one of the things, this is the thing I was thinking of earlier, you can take found footage horror films, they're supposed to have poor production value, but more people have access to skill. That doesn't make it art. So you have the technology, you have the skill, you have all the equipment. You can make a beautiful, beautiful artifact, but if it doesn't sing and we don't resonate to it, it's dead. And if you can make something just iPhone unfiltered, undone, or just rough footage, and it makes us feel, well, that's the thing that's going to get a little bit of traction. But the filmmaker takes the risk on that front end, and then when you go to market or wherever to get distribution, you've already taken the risk and the investment. So then the business element comes in, decides what's going to be the best horse to bet on relative to the size of the film and the algorithm, and then they can march it forward under the powers of that sort of the marketing element. And that's become kind of the new key. Who gets pushed to the front of the line rather than who gets suppressed.
Thank you, Ken. Anyone else want? Yeah.
Here. John was talking about the variety of things that we're considering. And I think John is right. This is the beginning of a discussion, because I think we really don't know what all of this will look like 5 years from now. We surely don't know what all of this is going to look like 10 years from now. When Ron and I listened to Andrew Greeley, we went to a movie rental store, and we watched those movies on VHS on that medium. And that was in 1997. And in the 20 years, and of course, since technology is moving faster all the time, 5 years from now is a who knows, and 10 years is nobody knows. We'll have to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I think so too. I think in 2 years' time, we'll have this talk again, and we'll have TikTok on the menu. And all right, there's still a couple of questions left, very little time, but I pick Ruby's question here. Briefly, gentlemen, what does it say about the Hollywood industry that fans and actors are turning to Kickstarters to raise funds for films that aren't considered important to Hollywood? It's again about the democratization. Somebody wants to elaborate on that?
It's about commerce. It's, as you'll notice, and this is a place where the television is starting to fill the gaps. I'm sorry about that sound. It moves. Either you're making a really, really large film, a $200 million film, or you're making SAG low budget, which is $2 million, I guess maybe $3 million now, and under. And ultra micro budget is better because you're going to get there's less risk. So you'll see more films, even with notable actors. It's 3 main characters in very few locations. So that way it's keeping everything very contained, and it's reducing the risk for people who invest. So absolutely, Tony, 8-minute shorts count as films because they're short films. Sorry, I just saw that one pop up. So what it says about Hollywood is it's the industry element with the larger studios. It's just commerce. It's just all about commerce. So if you make something and the filmmaker assumes the burden of getting it funded, however that happens, private investment or raised by a large funding system like Kickstarter or Seed and Spark or something like that, then you achieve the risk. They get to look at what you've made and decide whether it's worth betting on, and then you get some backing. And if not, then you can do self-distribution, and you can recoup a lot of that, ideally, a lot of that investment, but it's going to take over time. I mean, a standard ROI, a standard return of investment contract might be in a business projection would be over 60 months, you will get X% of this based on these territories. And so as a filmmaker, you have to be both a business person, you always are involved in production. You have to have language that you can discuss among all of these parts. Otherwise, you can be left out of a very important part of the conversation and the film just may die because you don't have the vocabulary for it.
Yeah. And if I may take the liberty, 2 minutes before we end, so nobody can correct me, you don't have time for that. This has been a very American discussion. I think if from a European perspective, we would have a different discussion, let alone if we would have this discussion from the Indian Bollywood perspective, we would have a different story as well. So I think, well, let's do this again and let's do it about movies from a different continent. Finally, to get back, because I was earlier just joking about renaming your precious journal, but we actually got some response on that. So there's Christian Peterson that says maybe a good place to start to think about renaming the journal would be to look at what changes in publication came out after the Society for Cinema and Media Studies changed their name and the journal's name a few years back. And then there's actually a suggestion for a new name from Seong Min Hong. Thank you so much for that. And it is Religion and Screen Culture. You might want to give that a little thought. But on that bombshell, we are about to close this this webinar. Any final words from you, gentlemen? John, would you mind starting?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to all of the panels here and to all of you who asked questions, to all of you who are watching. Keep reading the journal, keep studying this subject. And this has been a wide-ranging conversation, which shows you how many interests there are about this in so many different directions. And I certainly want to see that conversation continue. So it seems like the journal is going to throw the net a little wider. I think that's likely to happen, it looks like, and that's probably a good thing to happen. So thank you all for all your contributions and all the interesting ideas that we've had today.
Thank you. Bill, any final words from you?
No, I thought it was a terrific conversation. We need to think more broadly, and it's for somebody who started out rejecting TV and wanting only to see what we thought of as films then. I mean, we had debates about whether if a film was a television film, whether we should include that or not in the early days. It's really fascinating to see how the landscape has changed.
Thanks, Bill. Ken?
I just really appreciate the conversation and also excellent point, Miranda, about a very American film-centric line to it. And I can't wait to have more conversation with a wider scope. And also thank you, everyone who attended. Thank you for this conversation among the panelists. But it was just really exciting to start to try to think of these from different angles based on the questions or things that I hadn't thought of. And so my own mind is humming with all these possibilities. So thank you, everyone.
Cool. Well, your day is only just started, so you can hum along the rest of the day and be inspired. Thank you, Ken. Amir.
Just adding my thanks to everyone, and Miranda, thank you for chairing this. I'm really looking forward to next year being able to do this in person, have these conversations in Amsterdam. The point about precisely, looking at films, and that's one of the things I remind my students of all the time. You know, there's people outside of Hollywood that make films, right? There's people in other countries that make really good films that we watch, and in a funny way, LA is a great place for that because of all the different immigrant communities to be able to see that. But thank you all, and thanks to Courtney for being what's the word, the wizard behind the screens here. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Amir. All right, we're wrapping this up. This webinar was fully recorded by Courtney, and her name was already mentioned. Thank you for that, Courtney. It can be reviewed on the website of the Journal of Religion and Film. So if you want to view it again or share it, or I'd say put it on Hulu and stream it. The next live Religion and Film Conference will be held in Amsterdam at Vrije Universiteit next year. We look forward to being the host of this beautiful conference, and we hope to see you here in Amsterdam next year. End of May, beginning of June. We're working on a date, but you can check the journal for that, or the journal's website. Thank you again to our panel, And thank you to our participants for being with us, and have a lovely day or evening, depending on where you are. Bye-bye.
Yes. Thank you.